The Searchers emerged as part of the 1960s Mersey's beat scene, along with the Beatles, the Hollies, during the Pacemakers, and there were others too. Their rich harmonies, embellished with immaculate vocals, have assured the Searchers have that lasting place in our history of popular music. From those early days in the 1950s through to the 60s and up to 2017 as well. The Searchers have recorded in excess of 45 million. They've sold 45 million recordings right around the world. They're as popular today as ever. Now returning to Australia with two of the original members of the band with the Searchers Solid Gold Hits in Australia. Their tour is underway right now and they're heading towards Melbourne. Frank Allen joined the group back in 1964. He's been with them as a bass guitarist ever since. And Frank's on the line to talk to us right now. Welcome into Melbourne, Frank. How are you?
Very well. Good to be with you, Leigh.
Yeah, you too, pal. Nice to have you here. Gee, what a busy schedule. You're touring Australia right now. You're heading down to Melbourne a little bit later in a week or so's time. Boy, how do you cope with it all?
It's just what we're used to. If you keep the momentum going, and that's the way you work, you know, it comes as second nature. We invariably do between 150 to 200 shows per year all around the world. This Australian tour, we're over here for 6 weeks. And we do, in those 6 weeks, we do, 31 shows. So, it just comes second nature. You know, it's like people, it's no different to someone else going and doing a job. I mean, it must be much harder for someone who's getting up at 6 o'clock and digging up a road.
I think you might be right. So
we have it easy.
You're doing something you love, though.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is the difference. Yeah, we started out singing music because it's what we love. We eventually managed to find a way to get paid for it, and then we were in the charts and having success all around the world. And here we are, over 50-odd years, 55 years later, still getting paid for it, still loving what we do, and still getting applauded every 3 minutes. I mean, life doesn't get much better than that.
No, it doesn't. And the record sales, in excess of 45 million, as I said in the intro there.
Wish we'd have got the royalties.
Yeah, yes, of course. Who got the royalties?
I don't know where they went.
That's why you're on the road.
We did all right about it, but those were evil times. You know,
yeah, of course.
We had managements and agents like skimming off like you wouldn't believe. So it's the price of an education. You know, I'm not bitter about the whole thing, but I mean, we should have been much richer from those days than we eventually were.
Back in the 60s, of course, you were young kids in those days, and things were different. I suppose you got sucked in as it was, and you just went along, didn't you, for the ride?
Oh, yeah, we were, you know, we didn't know what we were entitled to, what we were supposed to be doing, the best deals to be done. In fact, neither did the managements in those days. Dear old Brian Epstein, who was one of the few honest managers around at the time, really didn't know what to charge people for the Beatles in those days. There's the famous story about him selling the merchandise rights for 10%, and the guy who actually came to do the deal had come to the meeting willing to give Brian 90% and to take 10% for himself. So you know we were all learning.
Yeah. Now you're one of the originals there with John McNally, of course. There's been some come and go as time's gone on, some rather tragic stories, but we won't go into those today. But you two are really the originals. You joined back 1964, wasn't it?
August the 3rd, 1964. It was a Monday night. It was the Coventry Theatre in England. I remember it very, very well.
Yeah, there you are. What influenced you then, Frank, to join the group?
They were my friends. That's what did it. You know, I was with another band called Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers, which was the best band in the UK. It was the band that everyone else looked up to. All the musicians absolutely loved that band, and it was a band that I desperately wanted to be in when I first saw them in the mid-50s. And I joined the band in 1961 as a rhythm guitarist, eventually changed over to bass by the end of that year. And we were out playing at the Star Club in Hamburg, which is where the Beatles and Jerry and Billy J and the Swingin' Blue Jeans, everyone all got their grounding. And we mixed with all the American stars like the Everly Brothers and Gene Vincent, Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis and all that. Great time. And I happened to come across the Searchers out there who, at the beginning of 1963, were not known outside of Liverpool and Hamburg. They hadn't been in a recording studio, whereas the band I was with, we made 6 singles by that time. But they were nice people. They were very moderate living people who used to go back to their hotel at night, write letters home to their girlfriends, who they eventually married and are still married to now. Hamburg was a den of iniquity at that time as well. So I was quite pleased to find this little oasis of sobriety and mix with them. Anyway, 6 months later, in that 63 period, the Beatles kicked all the doors down and the Searchers got their chance to go into the studios, and suddenly the friends that I'd accidentally made were international superstars. So I was just enjoying their company and the fringe benefits. And then a year later, they asked me to join the band, which I did.
That's a wonderful story, isn't it?
It's very lucky for me, I tell you.
Absolutely. Well, what do you put the success down to? I mentioned in the intro there about the harmonies, the immaculate voices and so on. Is that what it is? What's made the Searchers
several
last?
Things, really. The style of playing was slightly different to the other people that were around at the time. It was a very melodic sound.
Yes, it is.
Not all the time, because the first two records were quite hard-hitting, Sweet Spice, Sweet Sugar and Spice. Then you went into the Needles and Pins and Don't Throw Your Love Away period, which got much more melodic, and we used the sound of the 12-string from that point onwards. Well, really, from When You Walk in the Room onwards, which was my first record with the band.
That's the one that we had the intro,
They happened to be play good music, and they had their finger on the pulse of what was happening at the time. When you're young, you pretty know what other young people want, and the Searchers had their finger on the button that, they pressed the right buttons for the youth of today. So that was their talent, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, you had hit after hit after hit, and so we can list all of those, but, there was just so many. Look, I've got a list here of 1963, Sweet for My Sweet. What a beaut song that was.
Oh, it's great. That was the first one. It's an old Drifters song, actually. They hadn't had any success with it in the UK. And I actually, Drifters were a fantastic band, but I actually think the Searchers, and at that time I wasn't in the band, I think that was they did a magnificent version. It's so solid, that one.
It's a beautiful song.
That with Sugar and Spice, then of course Needles and Pins, Don't Throw Your Love Away, Someday We're Gonna Love Again. When You Walk in the Room was the first one I was on.
That's right.
Fortunately, that's been the one that's created the most impact over the years.
What it has, and it still lives today, doesn't it? It's so popular today.
It's been covered by more people than any other Searchers song. So many people. I mean, there's at least one clip of Bruce Springsteen doing it on YouTube. There's so many other people who've covered When You Walk in the Room. It really is an absolutely wonderful pop song.
You've got a great motto too about guitars travelling. I think your motto is "Have guitars and drums will travel."
Certainly, we go anywhere. We find it very difficult to say no, which is why we do the number of shows that we do a year. I mean, it is an insane schedule, and people actually can't believe it. It's become a sort of a standing joke, and we hooked, to keep up our reputation now. I mean, Cliff Richard, who's become a great chum, when we run into him, I see him sometimes on social occasions, he sort of said, "What are you doing here tonight? You're not allowed to have days off. Searchers don't have days off," sort of thing. And that's what it's become like, but it's what we like to do.
You don't get tired?
Sorry?
You don't get tired?
Yes. Yeah, we're getting older, and when you get older, you get more tired, but only for short whiles. In general, we're used to the pace, and we keep it up, and it keeps us motivated, so not tired enough to stop.
It's wonderful to see, because from that 64, when you joined in 1964 up to today, there's a lot of history there in those 54 years, and to see that you're still up there and doing it all over again, it's wonderful. Do you see the youngsters coming into the concerts as well as people my age?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a very wide age ranging group. I always used to say on stage that an audience of the Searchers today goes from incredibly young to fast approaching death. And that about covers it, really.
Good on you.
But we've got a lot of history in Australia as well, because the first time we talk about this on stage, because the show is interlaced with anecdotes about who we've been touring with, how we came across the songs, and what's been happening on our journey. First time we ever came to Australia was in 1964 when we were headlining a tour. Our support acts were Del Shannon, Peter and Gordon, Ian Kane and Dinah Lee, and we had a few other Aussie bands join us along the way. Then we came back in 66 with the Rolling Stones, which was an incredible tour. What a contrast.
Yeah, my word. Well, wasn't it that tour in 66 that Chris Curtis became disillusioned and left you?
Yeah, well, that's a story we sometimes tell on stage. It was a very traumatic tour for us, because Chris was going a bit off the rails. Chris, by the way, was a lovely person, and he was a true talent, had a great musical knowledge, but he'd become a bit disillusioned. Our records are not selling quite like they used to, and he was becoming disenchanted, and he'd also discovered the joys of amphetamines by that time, which really kind of messed him up. And we were having great difficulty in controlling him, so we eventually had to call in the tour promoter, Harry Miller, to have a word with him, and he threatened to call the cops if he didn't get his act together. And so there we were on tour with the Rolling Stones, who'd sailed through with no controversy whatsoever, and we were about to be involved in a drugs bust. It was really bizarre.
Good God.
And by the end of he collapsed before a television show, so the three of us had to go on a mime without him while he was rushed to hospital. He managed to fall off the stage at the Sydney Stadium, and by the end of the tour, he didn't want to be a searcher anymore. He decided he was going to leave. And when we got back to the UK, we had a meeting with our manager and Chris, tried to persuade him to stay, but no, that was it. He left.
It's not the image you're after, was it? Not the image at all.
Yeah, that's right. But it's such a shame. But it's stories like these that we tell on stage, to show people, give them more interest than just singing songs at them.
It was when Chris left in 1966 that you then turned to the cabaret circuit, didn't you?
Yeah, we'd stopped having the hits. In fact, our last hit was in '66, a song called "Have You Ever Loved Somebody," which was written by the Hollies, and so we transferred from mainly the touring theatre circuit to the cabaret clubs. Has just started to become the big thing in the UK. They were absolutely everywhere, and instead of doing one night, you would do a whole week in a cabaret club. And so we did our first one in '66 with our new drummer, who was a young guy called John Blunt, and it was looked on by some people as the group's graveyard, because it was a bit, you weren't teenage idols anymore. But the thing was, what I learnt later on, that was our university education for what was to come, because it taught us how to play to an audience. There was no longer screaming. They were sitting there waiting to be properly entertained.
Yep.
So we then had to construct a show that had light and shade and pace, and we had to intersperse that with some, some speech to connect the songs, introduce them, and involve the audience. And,
a huge change.
It was a very important time for us on reflection.
Frank, 2008, you returned to the pop charts, didn't you? You got back in there with the very best of the searchers. That's
right, yeah. Got to number 11. Yeah. We were only kept out of the top 10 by Frank Sinatra.
Go on.
If he was still alive, I'd kill him.
Well, he'd have a double burial.
That's right.
Second coming.
It's great. It's things like that often surprise us. Some of the biggest things in our life happened after we were well out of the charts. 1981, we did our Royal Variety Show. I mean, our hits had stopped in 66, so there we were, 1981, being presented to the Queen. 1989, we did 2 days at Wembley Stadium with Cliff Richard, 80,000 people on each day.
Wow.
We were a totally different entity to those that 63 to 66 period, and then of course back in the charts with that album in 2008.
Frank, we're running out of satellite time.
What's going to happen?
Yep, we're running out of satellite time. I've got to mention where you're going to be. You're at the Palms at Crown here in Melbourne. You're there on the 11th of March, a couple of weeks away from now. The booking number is 136100. That's Palms at Crown 136100. Those listening online, the Capitol Theatre in Bendigo. The boys are there too. You can ring 5434 6006. You're at Horsham at the Town Theatre there on the 9th of March. And, yes, just mentioning Mildura too. Mildura Arts Centre on the 12th of March. A very, very busy and hectic schedule for you guys. Take care, my friend. Great to catch up with you, Frank. And I'm sure we'll be there on the night to see this concert all over again.
Brilliant. Well, all of those places are great places for us to visit again. So thanks for having me on the show.
You enjoy your stay in Australia.
Thanks.
Take care, pal. Okay, bye-bye to you.